because in 2013 Mum died, and then in 2015 Nell was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
Yeah.
And it seemed just impossible to believe that after having been through what Mum had experienced, that now Nell was now going into this kind of place of, like, she was kind of facing the darkest thing possible, and she really dealt with that by really, really flinging herself into her work and into her creativity. And her creativity became kind of, so she created this beautiful circus, which is not a kind of, when you say circus, I think people quite often think of something a bit shabby or a bit depressing, but her circus was beautiful burgundy wagons. It was like a kind of dream fantasy of what a circus should be. But she had a circus. She was also writing cookbooks. She was doing massive embroideries. She was doing. She created hundreds of paintings, which were sold after she died. She had an exhibition after her death.
Wow.
It was as though being close to death for her.
Yeah.
Kind of creativity was the place where she found some kind of solace and some kind of. I don't think she found peace. I don't want to say that she found peace, because it wasn't peaceful for her. And I know very well how much anguish she was in. But she found a place to exist, to be there.
That's a beautiful way to put it. She found a place to exist.
So The Red of My Blood is about the first year after her death. And it's like what grief feels like. And I wrote it partly because I wanted to read that book myself. And I was in a place of such pain and such kind of fear of where was this going? Was I going to feel as in pain and as kind of crazed and as miserable and broken? And I remember looking at people who'd been through great loss and thinking, well, how the hell are they doing this? Like, what are they doing?
What is this? Yeah, because it felt like there's two questions. Who can I possibly survive?
Yeah.
The weight of this love.
Yeah.
That always feels like an ongoing question.
Yeah.
And then the feeling of, where can I find you? Where can I find you? Where can I find you? You're so good at describing that feeling. Are you here? Are you here? How many sparrows in the whole world can hold the memory of you reminding me of something? Is it this rainbow? Is it that star?
Yeah.
Where do I find you? I think it's... Especially because love makes us feel so permeable, you know, so it can't just be, well, death is the end of love. It just never is. So the chasing it and feeling like the hurricane of it makes so much sense to me when you describe it.
The hurricane, exactly. And the kind of, the torrent of feelings, but also the torrent of beauty that came with it.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I was really aware. Yes. And when I first started thinking about how to write about grief, I thought about various books I'd read about grief, and they often had a kind of grey-ish or blue, dark-ish cover with maybe the outline of some leaves or an outline of a winter tree or something. And I thought, that's not what grief feels like to me. That's not what I'm feeling like now. I'm feeling as though I'm like going to explode with the amount of pain in my head. And that pain is bright colours. And you know when you're like walking around and you stub your toe on the edge of a table, that is a colourful feeling as well, isn't it? That doesn't feel like the most pain, that extreme pain, or cut yourself really badly. That is a colourful feeling.
There's so many, I feel like in my mind there's a little list of when people say it, like poet Christian Wyman calls it My Bright Abyss. Or one woman I knew who wrote a beautiful book in the last few months of her life called The Bright Hour. And it was the feeling of like the shimmeriness of dusk, and she's looking at her kids. Yeah. And I felt the same. I thought I was going to die in 9 months. And the brightness is such a intense part of my memory and my experience. Like, okay, I don't mean for this to be like the... my brother-in-law murders bears with a bow and arrow. Right. As part of one of his businesses. Ryan. And killing bears is a intense thing, but they have this moan that they do right when they're hit, like they know, because they know. Yeah. And the sound they make is almost unlistenable. It's so visceral. Really? But it's so beautiful. and it's called the death moan. But
Yeah.
but it's a song, and I did feel that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes, where some of it is like
Yeah, yeah.
and then some of it is, but it demands something. It's like it's asking for something back from the world. I think, but there is something about the crystalline quality of that kind of love.
Yeah, and the kind of... When Nell died, she had stage 4 cancer, but she had, and her oncologist had said to her a few days before she died that he was keeping the cancer at bay, although it was moving fast. He did give her like 5 to even potentially as an outside chance 10 years. So we'd been feeling quite jubilant.
Yes.
But when she died very, very suddenly. She was in hospital and she got liver failure basically because of the chemotherapy. And she had been kind of fine. She'd been travelling. She'd been buying horses for her show. She'd been like with her boyfriend in Cuba. And then she was in hospital. And then the doctor rang me and said, you have to come now. And she had a day to live. And I remember being in the hospital in that kind of very grey, generic hospital kind of corridor with a feeling of a massive, and it almost sounds like a cliche, like the idea of the angel of death, but it was as though I could feel death coming into the room in the same way that when you give birth, there's nothing you can do to stop that birth coming. It's there. She had an extraordinarily beautiful death, and I feel very privileged to have been there in those moments with her when all of the closest family was with her, and we sang to her and read to her and prayed with her, and she became, she went out of consciousness eventually. But in the aftermath, I felt as though I was going to die of pain.
Yeah.
I felt as though I was going to die of pain, but I also felt as though everything was so much more, the world around me was what we were talking about, this kind of glittering colours. Not all the time, but there were moments, if I looked, when it was there. And sometimes I want to say to people in the early stages of grief, which is obviously a very difficult thing to say to them because you can't say it to everybody, but like, be alive to what's happening to you now. This is an extraordinary time of your life.
Yes.
And
that's really wise.
And this is like, you are the kind of, I think that early stages, almost like pre-funeral.
Yes.
And Nell died just before Christmas. And she wasn't buried until after Christmas. So we actually had a whole month where you feel as though you are split open and everything is kind of bubbling and sparkling.
Aren't we all so beautiful? I kept thinking that, like at the grocery store, like everybody's in the hospital.
Yeah.
Just look over and somebody is just like chucking a little strand of hair, and I would think, aren't we just so beautiful?
Yeah.